On his return from the intricacies of Jenkins's ear, I invited Peterson for a drink, a statement that completely fails to convey the speed and enthusiasm with which he whirled us both into the bar and got the drinks in. I sipped my margarita and brought him up to speed. That done, we fell back on having a good moan about our staffing issues. Being early evening, there weren't many people around, and I had a good 30 minutes before meeting Leon for something to eat. Peterson was avoiding Helen, whose nicotine deprivation was laying waste to everything around her. So it was a rare moment of peace for both of us. We both sighed, sat back, put our feet up on the battered coffee table, and relaxed. The explosion blew in the windows. The curtains billowed inwards, tables were overturned, glass lay everywhere in glittering fragments. Peterson and I, neither of whom had relinquished the grip on our drinks even for a second, were quite surprised by this, as was everyone else in the room. The only sound was the final tinkle of falling glass. And then the fire alarms went off. Major Guthrie raced through the bar shouting, "Stay here, everyone," kicked his way through the shattered French windows and disappeared. Peterson drained his drink. "Come on," he said, and we followed Guthrie outside. My first thought was that the time police were back for some reason. I always associate them with explosions. I'm told they have a similar opinion of us. My second thought was that Professor Rapson had really excelled himself this time. But no, this particular Big Bang had come from outside St. Mary's. A big, black, mushroom cloud of smoke hung over the grounds. There was a terrible smell, a truly terrible smell. The traditional smoking crater occupied the space where much of the south lawn had once been. Unidentifiable lumps of concrete lay everywhere. Some had come down with considerable force and gouged great lumps out of the tiny part of lawn that was still hanging in there. Burning branches and leaves were dotted around all over the place. People were stamping on the smouldering grass, trying to put out the fires, and still there was that terrible smell. Well, at least no one seemed to be hurt. Wrong. I caught Peterson's arm. I could see 3 figures on the ground, horribly still. One was clad in the smoking remains of a green jumpsuit, and the other 2 in blue. "Shit," said Peterson under his breath, and we ran to investigate. Markham, Bashford, and Roberts were lying spread-eagled on their backs, their faces black, their eyebrows gone, their clothing smouldering. My finely honed historian senses told me that they and this unexplained explosion were somehow linked. Peterson was bending over them. They were alive, but only temporarily. Any minute now, the less than stable Dr. Foster would be among us, closely followed by Dr. Bairstow, unreasonably demanding explanations. I would have advised them not to start watching any long-running TV series, but they wouldn't have heard a word I said. Guthrie was there as well, alternately yelling at them and checking them for fractures and the like. They smiled hazily at him. Evans was putting out their smouldering clothing. Given the damage around them, they seemed miraculously unscathed. Markham must have extended the umbrella of his invulnerability over them. Faintly, in the distance, I could hear sirens. The emergency services were on their way. The chief constable would be on the phone. None of this was good. "Oh, God," said Peterson, "not again." I said, "You go, head the you can. I'll see to this. I could see Helen and her medical team jogging across the former lawn. She was probably so weighed down with nicotine patches that she couldn't run any faster. At that moment, I wouldn't have been Markham or Bashford or Roberts for any money. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see two grubby grey figures, Lingos and Sykes, endeavouring to fade into the background. Of course. Just as I was congratulating myself that for once none of my people could possibly be involved, you two, front and centre, what happened here, and more importantly, what is the extent of your involvement? Lingos shuffled to her feet. There was a rat, and it might have been my idea. I set my teeth. Go on. We saw a rat. Who are we? Mr. Markham, Mr. Bashford, Mr. Roberts, and us. It ran into the shrubbery over there. We had to do something. They're vermin, you know. An explanatory tone. I'm a training officer. I'm familiar with vermin. She pointed to the ex-shrubbery at the top of the drive. Now, just a series of sad stumps. It ran into those bushes there, those bushes that used to be there. We thought we'd flush it out, and any others, of course. Enlightenment landed as heavily as the lumps of concrete must have done. I mustered all the restraint I could find. It's the old septic tank. No one wanted the bother of digging it out, so they planted the shrubbery to conceal it. You blew up the septic tank. We didn't know that, said Lingos. None of us knew. Anyway, aren't we on the mains? I loomed. Quite a feat when you're as short as I am. But I was in a looming mood. We are now, we weren't then. Continue with this sorry tale. Well, if we'd known that, then our actions might have been a little different. It's not our fault we didn't know. Can we get back to the rat? Yes, sorry. Well, it ran into the shrubbery, which we now know to have concealed the septic tank. Yes, we've covered that. Move on. Actually, we were going to shoot it, but Mr. Markham said that might be quite dangerous. And I had a brilliant idea. We got some bottles, filled them with just the very tiniest drop of paraffin, and plugged them with an old rag. I groped for words, and that doesn't happen often. You what? Have you never heard of methane? I demanded, with all the confident knowledge of one who has experienced an exploding manure heap at first hand. Well, yes, obviously, but we didn't know there was methane because nobody told us about the septic tank. Really, it's not our fault. I could feel the beginnings of a headache coming on. We'll have signs made, I said nastily. Go on. Well, we made up a few more bottles, Molotov cocktails, if you like, yes. How many? Only a few. How many? Hardly any. They stepped back. 6. I breathed heavily. We could see this bit of broken concrete over what looked like a hole in the ground, and we reckoned the rat had gone down there. Mr. Bashford prized it up and we tossed in the 5 bottles. Then we lit the 6th and tossed that in the ground. She stopped, a born storyteller. And nothing happened. So Sykes and I started to leave because we've got exams tomorrow. She said very seriously. Anyway, we'd only gone about 10 paces when there was this God almighty bang and we were flying through the air. I curled into a ball because I could hear things hitting the ground around me. What things? Bloody great lumps of what we now know to have been septic tanks, helpfully, but some other stuff as well. What other stuff? Probably the contents of great flaming lumps of congealed organic matter, bits of burning bush. Fortunately, we were pretty well out of range. Not so the others, of course. Helen and her team had the Three Stooges on their feet. Bashford was wandering around in a small circle, humming gently to himself, peering blearily at the world in a semi-conscious state appeared to be his default state. I wandered over. Hey, Helen, how's it going? I had meant, how's it going in relation to our 3 casualties? But she obviously had the tunnel visions common to all those weaning themselves off cigarettes. Did you know, she demanded, apparently abandoning her medical responsibilities, that when Raleigh returned from his travels with potatoes and tobacco, it was potatoes that were deemed to be hazardous to people's health? I did actually, but now hardly seemed a moment to engage her in a discussion concerning the risks of starch versus nicotine. No, I said, really? How interesting. Apparently, the potato was responsible for, among other things, scrofula, excessive farting, and general overindulgence in matters carnal. Well, that accounts for the security section's love of chips. She sighed. So, other than that, how is it going? Oh, fine, not too bad at all. Fortunately, I don't seem to be falling prey to the sudden and irrational bouts of head-bursting rage that inflict lesser mortals giving up cigarettes. Bashford, I swear, if you don't stop doing that this minute, I'm going to tear off your head, reach down your neck, and work out your testicles from the inside. It's all very well saying smoking can damage your health, but giving it up damages everybody else. We watched as she shepherded them back to the building where they would be nursed back to health, ready for almost certain execution by Thursday. I was struck by a sudden thought and turned back to the perpetrators. And what of the rat? Actually, we think the rat might have got away. I looked around. In the distance, I could see Peterson arguing with a group of firemen. A big, red, shiny vehicle with a ladder panted at the gates. For some reason, they all wanted to come in. Mr. Strong, on his knees at the edge of a pretty impressive crater, was keening over the remains of his south lawn. In their panic, the horses had knocked down a section of fencing and bolted. God knows where they were. The swans appeared to have taken refuge in a nearby tree. I don't know if other people's swans can do this, but I swear ours can go up a 40-foot beach and go faster than a banker collecting his annual bonus. People were standing around grinning, except for Röell, who had on his grim Victoria face. He was definitely not amused. Perhaps this was the final straw and he would leave. I had the grace to feel a little ashamed of the thought, but only a very little. Before I could make my escape, Mrs. Partridge appeared at my elbow and contemplated the scene before her. She said nothing in a manner that conveyed volumes. I said nothing in a manner that I hoped conveyed my complete innocence. She said nothing in a manner that conveyed her disbelief in my innocence. I said nothing in a manner that conveyed my hurt at this. She said nothing in a manner that effortlessly conveyed the message that Dr. Bairstow wished to see me at his earliest convenience and to collect Dr. Peterson while I was at it. I said nothing in a manner that conveyed there was actually a very reasonable explanation for this, and she laughed when she heard it. She just said nothing.